This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one leader, one country, or one moment in time. What you are watching unfold is quieter than that, and more dangerous. Because when a state stops trying to govern and starts trying to erase resistance instead, something fundamental breaks. Not all at once, not loudly, but systematically. Entire systems are being repurposed. Information disappears. Violence becomes procedural. Silence is enforced, not requested. And the most important detail is this: the world does not respond to this kind of failure all at once. It reacts in fragments. Economically, militarily, digitally. By the time those fragments connect, the original trigger is no longer the story. If you're still with me, stay. Because what looks like chaos is actually structure. And once you see the structure, you can't unsee where this is heading. That's where we go next. Here is the mistake almost everyone makes. They look for the villain, a face, a speech, a uniform. But systems like this are not driven by emotion anymore. They are driven by preservation logic. What actually controls the system now is not ideology, not belief, not even loyalty. It is fear, translated into procedure. When survival becomes the only objective, institutions stop asking why and focus only on how fast. Communication becomes a liability, so it is cut. Civilian life becomes unpredictable, so it is compressed. Violence stops being reactive and becomes scheduled. At that point, the system is no longer trying to win consent. It is trying to outrun collapse. And here's the dangerous part. Once a state operates this way, every external actor misreads it. They respond to statements, to gestures, to signals that no longer matter. Because the system is no longer negotiating. It is executing. That misunderstanding is where acceleration begins. And it started long before anyone noticed. The most dangerous changes do not arrive as shocks. They arrive as adjustments. Before, force was framed as response. Now it is framed as maintenance. Before, disruption was temporary. Now it is assumed. This is the silent shift. A system that once needed visibility now survives on opacity. Connectivity was treated as strength. Now it is treated as exposure. The absence of information is no longer a failure. It is a tactic. And over time, that tactic becomes normal. Hospitals adjust, families adjust, markets adjust, even outrage adjusts. This is how thresholds move without alarms. Because when violence is gradual, the human brain recalibrates. What would have been unthinkable becomes tolerable, then procedural. And here is the part most people miss. Once a system trains itself to operate in darkness, turning the lights back on becomes dangerous, not for the population, for the system, which is why the next moment is never de-escalation. It is exposure, and exposure is what triggers the first real crisis. That's next. The first visible rupture does not come from a speech. It comes from absence. The lights go out, not physically, digitally. Connectivity collapses across an entire country, not by accident, by design. And almost immediately, the data that does escape begins to change. Doctors notice it first. The injuries arriving are no longer consistent with crowd control. They are no longer sporadic. They are no longer survivable. Hospitals are overwhelmed, not because they are underfunded, but because they are being fed a volume and severity they were never meant to absorb. This is the moment where policing ends and military logic takes over. Not announced, not debated, just activated. The shift is fast, deliberate, and invisible to anyone without access inside the system. By the time officials acknowledge deaths at all, they are already behind their own machinery. That lag matters, because when a system admits a fraction of damage, it signals something worse underneath. This is not about numbers, it's about intent. And intent is what the system can no longer hide. Which raises the next question. Once force becomes policy, who is actually giving the order? Hold that thought. Here is how the system actually works once it crosses that line. Orders no longer travel downward as commands. They travel upward as permission. Violence is not improvised. It is delegated. Responsibility is fractured on purpose. So no single actor feels ownership. Only compliance. Security units rotate. Jurisdictions blur. Paper trails thin. Not to create chaos, but to distribute guilt. Those who carry out the force are insulated. Those who authorize it are buffered. Those who benefit never touch it. And the cost? It is absorbed quietly by civilians, by hospitals, by families, by time. This is why internal leaks matter, not because they reveal morality, but because they signal stress. When information starts escaping from inside a closed system, it means coordination is breaking down, not ideologically, operationally. That is when external actors miscalculate. They assume pressure will slow the system, sanctions, statements, deadlines. But pressure applied to a system built for survival does not moderate behavior, it compresses it. And compression produces the second crisis. Faster, sharper, harder to contain. That's where this goes next. The second rupture does not announce itself. It accelerates. Arrests multiply, detentions thicken, names disappear, legal process collapses into throughput. Not justice, not even punishment. Processing. Labels replace evidence. Categories replace people. Once that happens, speed becomes the objective. Trials shorten. Appeals vanish. Sentences harden. Death is no longer exceptional. It is logistical. And here's the critical shift. When a system moves this fast, it no longer distinguishes between dissent and noise. Everything becomes threat. Everything becomes target. At that velocity, mistakes don't slow the machine. They feed it, because reversal requires pause, and pause looks like weakness. So the system doubles down. Public warnings, expedited procedures, demonstrative force, all designed to do one thing, get ahead of fear. But fear doesn't disappear. It spreads. Inside institutions, inside families, inside the people ordered to enforce it. And once fear turns inward, the system begins consuming itself. That is the moment that looks like control and is anything but. This is where it stops being abstract. Because systems like this don't stay contained. They leak outward and downward. If you are watching this, you are already inside the blast radius. You feel it as distortion, as delay, as uncertainty about what information is real and what has been filtered out. You feel it when violence becomes background noise and urgency loses meaning. Families don't experience this as geopolitics. They experience it as absence. Someone doesn't come home. A phone goes silent. A name moves from hope to paperwork. Grief is not allowed to gather, so it fragments, quietly, privately, and that matters, because collective fear only stabilizes a system for so long. Eventually, it reorganizes, not into peace, into resolve. If this feels distant, pay attention. Systems that normalize this behavior teach others what is possible, what is tolerated, what is survivable. And once that lesson spreads, distance stops protecting you. If you're still here, don't disengage now. This is the point where individual lives intersect with global consequences. That's next. This is the moment when the system stops being local. Economic channels tighten. Diplomatic language hardens. Military assets begin to shift. Not to act, but to signal. Every move is framed as restraint. Every preparation described as precaution. But systems under pressure don't read intentions. They read trajectories. Trade becomes conditional. Energy flows become leverage. Alliances strain under decisions no one fully controls. What looks like coordination is often just synchronization of anxiety. One state applies pressure to force change. Another absorbs it and redirects the cost inward. A third watches, calculates, and waits. None of them can fully disengage, because once violence becomes governance, it contaminates every connected system. Markets price uncertainty. Security planners model spillover. Information networks fracture into competing realities. And here is the danger. At this scale, no actor sees the whole board. They react to movement, not meaning. That is how miscalculation replaces strategy. And miscalculation doesn't need intent. It only needs momentum, which leaves the future balanced on acceleration, not choice. That's where we go next. From here, there are only three paths, not outcomes, trajectories. The first is adjustment. The system absorbs the pressure. Violence stabilizes at a lower visibility. Institutions rebrand without reform. The outside world declares progress and moves on. Nothing is fixed. But everything looks quieter. The second path is erosion. Capacity drains faster than control. Leaks increase. Enforcement fragments. Fear stops coordinating behavior and starts undermining it. The system remains intact but hollow, dangerous precisely because it still exists. Then there is the third path, rupture. Not collapse, not revolution, a break in predictability, a moment when internal stress and external pressure align and the system loses the ability to pace itself. Decisions come too fast. Signals misfire. Force is applied without calibration. This is the path no one publicly prepares for. Because preparation implies acknowledgement, and acknowledgement accelerates it. Right now, all three paths remain open. What closes them is not intent. It is timing, and timing is already slipping out of human control, which brings us to the only question that matters. What happens when acceleration becomes irreversible? That's the end we don't get to see yet. Here is the mistake we make at the end of stories like this. We look for closure, a turning point, a declaration that the danger has passed. But systems that reach this stage do not end cleanly. They persist, they mutate, they export their instability outward. Nothing you have seen guarantees resolution, only direction. The machinery is already in motion. Economic pressure, information warfare, security posturing, each justified on its own. Together, uncontrollable. The most dangerous phase is not the violence itself. It's the normalization of operating without brakes. Because once acceleration becomes acceptable, every future decision is made under compression. Faster, harsher, less reversible. If you are still watching, stay engaged. Not because answers are coming, but because clarity is. What happens next will not announce itself as catastrophe. It will arrive as necessity. And necessity is how systems excuse what they cannot stop. If you want to understand where this goes, you can't look away now. This story does not end here. It continues in the next decision, the next response, the next system that decides survival matters more than restraint. And once that choice spreads, none of us get to opt out. Stay with me.